Hey guys, welcome back to Pistons Talk Podcast. Hope you guys are having a great weekend so far. Had to bring on Zariq back on the podcast because last time you were so great that people told me he needs to be on at least once a week. Thank you for coming back on. I know we tried to schedule some stuff. You had your brother's graduation, which I get. I slept through my brother's graduation, but because they're so long and boring, man. But welcome back to the show, man. Happy to have you back.
Thanks, man. I'm glad to be back. Last time was a lot of fun, so I'm looking forward to this.
For sure. Before we do get started, I do like to give any guest I have on the floor to plug anything that you do, anything you work on, because I do know you're a photographer. I do know you do content creation. So the floor is yours for people that are listening to where they can follow you at.
Yeah, so this is definitely my time. I just put out photos today from the press conference yesterday. And then I also have a off-season predictions video / article coming by Monday. And then if you don't know, I run BULLYBALL with myself, my friend Jake, and Mike. We started it 2021, I want to say. So it's been growing a lot, which is really great to see. And we're credentialed in both NBA and NFL outlets, so it's pretty cool. And then on top of that, I'm on Twitter at Zariq Xavier, and then we're also on Twitter at BULLYBALL at Real BULLYBALL on everything. And I think that covers all my bases.
It does. It would be a podcast without a Jalen Green comparison. It just wouldn't.
Yeah, that's so every time I go anywhere, I get the Jalen Green thing. I think that might be my guy Ken though, so I think he's doing that as a joke.
It has to be a joke. But all seriousness, I actually read your article about Monty Williams and I absolutely loved it. There was a lot in there. I was like, oh wow, like Jar's breaking some news. Love that. Definitely go follow him on Twitter. Follow his website, Real BULLYBALL. I put links in the description to your Twitter and your Real BULLYBALL website so people can go follow that on Twitter and Instagram. Check everything out that you do, content creation wise. Hype trailers. I'm expecting a good one this year.
So okay, so I don't know for sure if I'm gonna do one this year, just because after last year, okay, I'm at a point right now where it's a little weird because I know so many of the people who work like the video for the Pistons, so they capture video and stuff like that. And I mean, I know some of them don't mind, but I don't know if like all of them don't mind. So I use a lot of like their footage that they'll post in my edits. And then on top of that, let's just be honest, the team's not really at a point where it's super hype right now. So we'll see. We'll see. I definitely will have videos though coming soon.
It's all good, man. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you could make a hype video about thread the needle and hugs. I don't know.
It's a 4:30 a.m. hugs.
Yeah. So speaking of 4:30 a.m. hugs, we're going to get into the press conference that happened yesterday.
Yep.
And one of the first questions I did want to ask you was a Tom Gores question. I think Omari had asked it about comments about wanting to start fresh. I wanted to know kind of like your initial reaction to him saying like, hey, like I thought for Trajan to, be here and start brand new. What was kind of like your reaction to him saying like I wanted them to have just a fresh slate, I guess?
So it's interesting because I have been now through a whole year of press conferences. Monty's was my first ever like big press conference I did. I think the first real Pistons press conference I did was Casey's exit interview, which shout out to him, one of the nicest people I've ever talked to. I talked to him for like probably like 30 minutes after the press conference. He's such a nice guy. But the tone Tom Gores had at the Monty introduction last year and the overall, I got to find a better word than vibes, but like the overall vibes of the situation between Monty and the introduction of Trajan were like night and day. And then even just kind of assessing like being a little away from the situation, seeing Tom Gores in general, because I've been following the Pistons my whole life, right? And for most of my life, Tom Gores has owned the Pistons, which I guess dates me a little bit. But but it was interesting because it was really candid, and he started the the speech by, noting that his daughter was like, you got to start writing things out, and and planning what you say. And you could tell that like he's someone who I know has his faults, right? As a NBA owner, where he kind of gets criticized for not being there or not knowing basketball or whatever. And like he addressed all of those things specifically. And I feel like in the past he was a little more defensive when it came to just his overall perception around the league and around like this fan base. You can tell that he cares a lot. And I think before he wanted to prove himself as a great basketball mind and a great basketball owner, but I think he's at a point now where he's like, okay, well, I'm kind of where I'm at. The team is where it's at. Let's reassess how we go about things. And he used the word CEO a lot when he was describing Trajan. And I think that's really important because even when you look at someone like Stan Van Gundy, who had the same title, he was hired back in like what, 2014? Yeah, 2014. That title of CEO wasn't really placed on Van Gundy, even though he technically did have more power as both head coach and president of basketball operations. It was interesting to know that like he admitted, yes, there's been too many voices. Yes, like I have interjected myself too much. Yes, we've made mistakes. But now I'm falling on Trajan. He doesn't just, and he said this a lot, he's not a basketball guy. He's not just a basketball guy, which obviously I know the fans just want to hear about basketball. But I think when it comes to decision making, having someone who you view as a CEO on just a business level makes a whole lot of difference in how you plan out things and how you go about things. And I don't mean to drag on too long, but I know you're a little bit of a wrestling guy. Yeah. I know a lot of the guys at back when we were at Woodward are big wrestling guys. And I can't help but kind of be reminded of, and this is kind of maybe a weird analogy, but I can't help but be reminded of like when Vince McMahon kind of lost the reins and Triple H came over in WWE. For those who are not inclined, wrestling is fake, right? But a lot of what goes into wrestling is planning, and you have to plan things in order to have a satisfying story and a satisfying conclusion, which leads to bigger ratings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Vince McMahon was a guy who kind of just wanted to go for the big pop. He wanted a big rating. He wanted a big, surprise. He would do things just for the sake of doing things. And I think that kind of describes Tom Gore's philosophy before. And Trajan, to me, seems like a slow burn type of guy. And for people that can go one of two ways, like some people are like, I would say most people are in for the long term, right? Like they want something they invest in to pay off at the end. And that seems like what Trajan's mentality is. Even in the way he speaks, you can tell he's very calculated in every single thing he says. And it seems very clear to me that he has a vision for this team. And right now, we're at like ground zero. We are at laying the foundation. And I know people are tired of hearing that phrase, but it seems like he truly has a foundation in mind and that he knows where that foundation is going to go. So that's kind of the approach Triple H had taken when he took over WWE. And, you look at like their ratings and their business numbers since he took over and they're exploding. Right. And right now it might not seem like the approach people want to take, but I think long-term, this shows a big change in philosophy.
So you're basically saying Trajan is going to turn an NXT into a WWE.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And
that's a great way of putting it.
If you're a wrestling nerd, you know what that is. I mean, I went to WrestleMania 23. I mean, some of those moves, breaking ladders in half, look pretty real. Like, I'm just going to say that.
I mean, yes. Yeah. I mean, wrestling takes a lot of physical. If you ever watch, you'll see the commercial. They go, this stuff hurts, like this hurts. And, like, there's a lot of real athleticism and injury involved in the profession.
I love that you turned it into a WWE analogy because I feel like Pistons Twitter are hardcore wrestling fans. Like I will see rock memes, I'll see Undertaker memes. Like I think the Pistons community are hardcore wrestling fans, and I love that because like Corey Woods, who I'm really good friends with, biggest wrestling guy you'll ever meet, man. He loves wrestling. My initial reaction was Tom Gores kind of reflected of like what he's done since he's bought the team, since he's purchased the team. And to your point, Vince McMahon always went for the pop, went for the big name. I mean, he went for Van Gundy. He went for Casey, he went for Monty, and basically said it hasn't really got me anywhere. So why not take a chance on a guy that is younger, still has an impressive resume, but I believe he can build this to where their success and we can keep stacking years to where we could look back 5 years from now and kind of laugh at this at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's like it's one of those things that like in the moment it seems like it could be concerning, I guess, if you're a Pistons fan because all you've seen in the last, I don't know, 5 years is tanking and acquiring bad players or bad contracts, all this other stuff. And I understand completely why that would be a concern. And I'm hesitant to say, oh, trust, Trajan in like the same way that you heard trust in Troy, right? But I truly do think he seems very calculated, and I think calculated is a great way to run a business.
Oh, I 100% agree with you. The one thing I like about him, and this is no shot at Troy, is his ability to compose a sentence. I know Troy is just like a really like nervous public speaker, but I mean, when I was credentialed during like the COVID season, Troy was low key funny. I'm sorry, like people don't know how funny Troy was. Troy
That's the
behind
thing.
like a screen, he was really funny.
Yeah, like I had been around Troy since like 2021, covering both the Crews and then this last season the Pistons. Troy the guy, actually pretty funny, has like his wits about him. Troy the public persona, the guy who comes in front of the camera with a microphone like this and goes, well, so it's two different guys. And I definitely think maybe as a public speaking thing, and I totally get that. I feel bad sometimes kind of like when we talk about Troy, just because I know he tried, right? Like I can at least say he tried. Did it go well? Obviously no, but he did lay the foundation for a foundation with this team. So yeah, but it's interesting is one thing I had noted to one of the people I was talking to after the press conference was like he seems like the anti-Troy, if that makes any sense. Like he seems like the guy who I noticed like Tom had said something about Trajan being able to run a steel company, and very slyly on the microphone he goes like, Tom, he goes, Trajan could run a steel company if he wanted to, and he goes, yeah, but I don't want to. And then it like got a laugh out of the whole room, and like that's just kind of the charisma and as the kids say, the aura that's missing in that's been missing in that role. So he's definitely got a completely different persona than Troy.
Yeah, I think the vibe with Trajan is confidence, a plan, knowing what it takes to be great. Not saying Troy didn't have any of those qualities, but it seemed like I know we're going completely off topic, and I love this. I always felt like Troy really focused on what he knew, and that was the draft and evaluating talent, where Trajan is good at identifying talent. You can look at the Pelicans, draft history over the past few years when he was over there. But he also has a plan of how to maybe get more draft capital, maybe not shortcut, because he talked about not shortcutting success, which we'll get into later. Seems like he has a 10-point plan, like a PowerPoint, if you will, that he's going to present to the front office and the organization, where Troy just kind of seems like we're going to hit the draft and maybe make a trade, maybe sign a free agent.
Yeah, I think Troy, I'm about to go on a complete tangent, so feel free to stop me. Because I'm kind of into like psychotherapy and things like that. Troy almost represents like I don't know if you've ever heard of like the left side of your brain versus the right side of your brain. The left side, and I might be getting this wrong, right? But I think as far as I know, one side of the brain essentially is mostly like creative and loose thoughts, like general, like loose thoughts and free flowing. And then the other side of the brain is a lot more structured and goal oriented. There's like a type A and type B when it comes to people. Trajan definitely strikes me as someone who's type A. Type A people typically have like everything planned out to a T, right? Like if you go on a vacation with someone who's type A, they're like, we're going to this place on this time. And then after that, we're going to get food from this place. And we already have a reservation set for that place. You know what I mean? So Trajan strikes me as that type of brain. Troy definitely strikes me as a type B, where he's more just like going with it. And sometimes it kind of felt like he did things simply to do things. And I can't really blame him because I myself am type B to a T. But it's interesting because I know that if I were to run a basketball organization, I would have to lean a lot more towards type A tendencies, right? And I think that's one thing that's going to be really interesting moving forward with how they assess the roster, how they assess things like cap space, and even things like hirings. Like I know they hired God, I'm blanking on his name, not Michael Blackstone, the other front
J.R.
office
Holden.
guy. Yes, yeah. They hired him specifically because he is a cap expert. So before even really moving forward in the offseason, he assessed, okay, what am I good at and what am I not? He knows, okay, I'm good at X, Y, and Z, and I need help in shooting. This team needs help with shooting. He goes out and he gets Fred Vinson, the best shooting coach in the world. Then he goes out and gets Holden, who is known to be one of the best cap experts in the world. He might think, okay, cap flexibility, managing contracts, managing trades with contracts, that might be something that I need a little help on. Let me go get him, right? So I think those types of things in your corner will have a huge impact on how the team moves. Like I can't imagine Trajan's the type of guy who's going to get fleeced in a trade.
Yeah.
That's like the main thing I'm trying to say here. I know that they're going to be really active in the trade market. Probably as soon as like honestly like Wednesday. They'll be very active. And I'm almost, let's say this, right? Let's say the Pistons are really interested in Cody Williams and they believe Cody Williams, who they could pick at 5, will probably be there at 10. Utah has the 10th pick. There's been a lot of talk of Utah wanting to move up. Let's go get the 10th, 29th pick and maybe take on one of their contracts for an additional asset for our 5th pick.
Yeah, I mean, take on Colin Sexton. I don't know.
Right? Or even a John Collins. I know that like it sounds unappetizing to Pistons fans who haven't. I know they want to go out and get a Brandon Ingram or they want to go out and get an OG Anunoby. And I understand that completely, but I'm also saying I'm starting to understand the mindset that Trajan's using. Because at first, I had the same feeling. I was like, I don't know if that's really the right mentality for this team. I don't know if that's like the right direction for them to go, because I really feel like with Cade kind of blossoming into that star that we all know he can be, shouldn't you go out and maximize that potential? But I think in order to maximize that potential, you have to maximize the assets you have, and you have to accumulate a lot more assets. Because to be completely frank with you, the Pistons have no picks to trade, right?
No.
All their picks are pretty much locked up because of the Stewart trade back in 2020. So they need to go out and get other teams' first round picks, not just meaningless second round picks. They need to go get first round picks in order to go make a trade like that in the future, in order to make those steps. And that's not saying they're just going to turn over and be bad this season. They're going to get what they want, but they're also going to get assets for the things that they want, if that makes any sense.
What I will say, and then we can move on to the next segment, is I think a lot of Pistons fans' view of what Trajan wants to do is a very black and white subject where there's no room in the middle to where you can take on a contract and still get a good player. People think, oh, I'll just use this player as an example, and I hope it doesn't happen. If it does, I don't know, maybe I'll do something stupid. Like Ben Simmons, right?
Okay.
He's got 1 year left on his deal. People think, oh, we're just going to take on Ben Simmons for a year and use like $40 million of our cap. I don't really think it's that black and white. I think there's some ground room in the middle to where there are some players that are on some mid-tier to larger deals that can come in and help this team win more basketball games. I don't think it's so drastic the way some fans are arguing right now on Twitter as we're doing this podcast right now, probably about all these guys on big contracts that are going to use like 90% of our cap space.
You know, because again, I felt that same way initially. I was like, you know, like, okay, what, you're going to go out and get Ben Simmons? Ben Simmons was really a name that was brought up, right? I heard Ben Simmons. I was like, you know, like, is that really what we're going to do? I think with the new CBA coming into effect and with a lot of teams approaching a second apron who aren't contending or aren't in the space to contend yet or need to make moves in order to contend, a lot of teams will be looking to get off of money this summer. And I look at maybe someone like Andrew Wiggins, or I look at, you know, maybe even Zach LaVine, let's see, DeAndre Hunter, who else comes to mind?
Jonathan Kuminga.
Yeah, because those are all guys. So like, let's say Andrew Wiggins. Let's use Andrew Wiggins as an example. The Pistons have been known to have interest in Tobias Harris, right? We all know they have a lot of interest in signing Tobias Harris, bringing him here. Would you rather sign Tobias Harris, or would you rather take on Andrew Wiggins and get like a Moses Moody also, you know, for taking on that contract? So I don't think it's going to be as bad as we've kind of been conditioned to think it will be. And I don't blame anybody who really like has a lot of hesitancy towards like the taking on bad contracts. I just think what is seen as a bad contract is changing because of the new CBA. So a bad contract last year was Joe Harris, and we all know how that went. You're not going to go get a Joe Harris this year. You're going to probably end up with a player who is in a tier of a player you would probably want to go out and sign anyways. Teams are just going to be looking to make cap space if they're not where they need to be.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think sometimes we get so reactionary to any kind of news we hear, and we always expect the worst because why wouldn't we? I mean, we're Pistons fans. Like, we're going to overreact to everything. Yeah. But I think Trajan, to your point, is a smart enough guy that where he's not going to get fleeced. He's not going to help the New York Knicks so they can sign Jalen Brunson. Yeah. He's not going to do any of that. I think he knows what he wants, and he's probably going to go get it, and he's probably going to get a pick in the meantime.
I think that's exactly like the plan. And I don't think that means they're not going to try and be a lot better this year. I just think it will look a lot different than we were expecting it to look. And I truly am very curious because, like, I hear things, right? And whatever, I don't report everything I hear, but a lot of the things that I've heard before Trajan really got settled in was like, the Pistons are going to be aggressive. They're going to be looking to, you know, build around Cade and Asar. Now it seems more like, okay, what do we have in Ivy? What do we have in Duren? And I think they really want to explore that young core. And I think that's a positive development, especially if you think that Monty Williams last year didn't help their development. If anything, he might have hurt their development. So if you truly believe that, then totally go out and get assets while also helping this team win more games. Like, I think we all are thinking, I don't know, like the 2000, whatever, the Sixers, the process Sixers, right? Where they just take on and trade away. You know what I mean? Like they're not trying to win. I think if there is a blueprint for this team, it might not be the Rockets from last season like we thought it was going to be. It might be more like the Utah Jazz from the last couple of years, where they go out and acquire players who can help them, and they also acquire bad contracts who also can still provide help on the court. I know they haven't made the play-in the last couple of years, but if they were in the Eastern Conference, maybe not this past year, but the year before, they would have made the play-in. They had 37 wins, and I believe Chicago this year had like 35, and they made the play-in. So I think this team is going to be a lot more competitive, and the whole thing of we might not win every game, but we're going to be competitive and we're going to play winning basketball every game is exactly that type of identity. And if I'm a Pistons fan, I go and look at a team like Utah the last couple of years and I go, okay, that might be what we're looking at.
Yeah, I agree. I think Utah is a good team to look at. I think what OKC's done over the past couple of years of taking on bad contracts for draft capital is definitely an avenue that I think some Pistons fans should look at, because why not? If you want to be bad for another year, this upcoming draft class in 2025, you got Cooper Flag, Ace Bailey. I'm not saying we're going to win the lottery, so we'll probably get fifth again, but I don't even know why I'm hyping up the 2025 draft. But hey, you never know.
I mean, honestly, a Cooper Flag changes a whole lot. And you can't bank on that. But if you can get Cade a Cooper Flag, I think you'd much rather give him a Cooper Flag than, I don't know. I don't want to say Tobias Harris because he still could very likely be a Piston. But like, would you rather go out and trade for Brandon Ingram, or would you go out and draft Cooper Flag next year while also still being competitive? You know, like you won't have you don't have to have the worst odds in order to get the number one pick, as we have seen the last couple of years. So I think I'm a little more hopeful in how they're building this team than I was even yesterday after the presser. I think it's just going to require a little bit of patience.
For sure. Before we do get into this next segment, we have to hear from our sponsors over at the GameTime Ticket app. You guys, I have to tell you about today's sponsor, the GameTime Ticket app. How exciting would it be to attend an MLB baseball game this summer? GameTime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the GameTime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and their lowest price guaranteed. GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Now, one of my favorite features within the app is the views from your seats feature, and we're going to look at some Detroit Tigers tickets. I know they are playing this weekend. They are playing the Chicago White Sox. I'm going to try to go out to the Sunday game. And there's a couple flash deals right here, as you guys can see. Lower baseline box, 143. This is 10% off. Usually these are $20 tickets. They're on sale for $17. And this is my favorite feature, the views from your seats. You get to see how close you're getting to the action. Guys, take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code CLNS for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Appreciate GameTime for sponsoring today's podcast. And I don't know why my mic sounded like I was underwater. Because it sounds fine now, but it sounds like it was muffled. I think sometimes I had
it just happens like that.
I think I had the volume like way too high in OBS. I think it was like cranked like 100%. But we're gonna get back into it. We're gonna get back into another question that I did want to ask you, and we kind of alluded to it a little bit about Tom Gores. He was kind of talking about how he wanted a CEO, a leader. So, what was your initial thoughts of him saying like, I want someone to be on the day-to-day basketball, but also be someone that can lead the entire organization from, I don't know, Hooper to all the way to like guys like Arntelm in the front office?
So like we had talked about, the CEO title was definitely really interesting. And I thought the change in how he approached things is really interesting, because he said he was too focused on the basketball and winning, without saying winning the headlines, right? I can't speak on the day-to-day of the Pistons front office, as I am not a member of the Pistons front office. However, I can say that like we all have heard too many cooks in the kitchen. There's different factions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if it's not that they didn't know how to lead. They might not just have had the power to, if that makes sense. There wasn't a clear leader, even though maybe Troy Weaver was given the GM title. He might not have been, I don't want to say respected, but he might not have been the most commanding voice in that room. Stan Van Gundy, that honestly predates my real experience of knowing things like more than, surface level. But even for Van Gundy, I think you look at like a Blake Griffin trade, and we all know that was influenced by Tom. That's not to say it was, because to this day, I still don't think the Blake Griffin trade was really that bad. I think what followed, the lack of making a team around Blake, was bad, but I think the Blake trade itself wasn't really that bad. Just my opinion. Because that man gave you his very best season. Anyways, I think making it very clear that Trajan has the final say. Trajan is the boss. Trajan has the vision, and everything else from roster to front office to coaching will be in his vision. And I think that maybe more so says more about how they're now approaching things and how they have seen how maybe they have stepped over each other or stepped on each other's toes a little bit too much in the past. That now they're like, okay, Trajan both has the ability and he himself has the, I don't know, I don't want to say like power, but he has the ability to do that himself as well. Like, we are giving him the ability, and he himself innately has that as part of his personality. Because it does seem like he's someone who, even in the way he answers questions, right? Like if you were to ask him a question, he'd go, "Well, that's a great question, Anthony." And like it's very clear that he's someone who sees things a lot more than what initially, like, he sees things beyond the actual picture. He sees, okay, this guy is good at this role, and we'll make sure he is best in that role, so we hide his deficiencies. And that speaks to like the leader, I guess he is, because he's able to see people as they are, but also as what they're also not, if that makes any sense.
I thought, now maybe I'm off in left field, and I know people in the chat can call me crazy. I thought this was a direct shot at previous regimes without saying it was a direct shot from Tom Gores, saying I needed someone that could be on the basketball side and be the CEO. Van Gundy was a president, but he was also a coach, and he really didn't say too much about saying. I felt like this was more at a shot at Troy without actually saying his name, saying like, yeah, Troy was really good. He said he was really good at basketball. He was like really good, like on the basketball court, but on the business side, he struggled. That's where I kind of took it. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm in left field with this, but it kind of seemed like he felt Trajan was more qualified to do both drafting, both evaluating, but also doing the day-to-day stuff that this front office maybe hasn't done over the past couple of years.
It definitely felt that way. And I know that a lot of people at the presser definitely took it that way, as like, oh, okay, like that was interesting, right? Where he was like, we have one voice, one vision. And maybe in the past there wasn't that commanding, So I definitely think Tom is someone who will never come out and say, this person was bad at this. We didn't like this. We didn't get along. He'll never say things like that. He still kind of wants to win the headlines. He's never going to come out. Can I swear?
Go ahead, man.
Yeah. He's not going to come out and just shit on someone, right? Like, it's been reported both by myself. I think James has also said this. He didn't have really a good relationship with Monty. But in every single statement he has made about Monty leaving the Pistons, he goes, Monty's a great guy. We appreciate what he did, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that kind of correlates to the whole CEO thing of very proper business speak, where they're not going to go out and say, yeah, Monty wasn't really a good fit here. Didn't feel like he wanted to be here. Didn't get along with players, et cetera, et cetera. He's not going to come out and say things like that. He's just going to go, we thank him. We appreciate him taking a chance on us, which is something he said yesterday. And we wish him the best. You're never going to get him to outright say something. But if he does, it's going to be something subtle like, with coaching, we're looking for someone who's really going to take the time to be patient with the players and really help develop them and all these other things. And it goes, okay, so that wasn't something that was happening before. So it's you really with Tom, and I think also with Trajan, because he doesn't really strike me as a guy who's going to come out and attack someone's character. You're going to have to look at a little bit of corporate speak here, where it's like they are pretty much saying this guy was bad at this. We didn't like this about him, but they're going to say it as a way of, we're looking to improve with this. And we didn't really have this in the past. And now we're going to go out and get someone who has these qualities. So I think, yeah, that definitely was a shot, but it was a corporate shot.
It like if you didn't like kind of pay attention to the press conference, and I'm Mr. Sicko, I've listened to it 4 times back.
You're crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. I think the YouTube like watch time on my phone yesterday was like 19 hours or something like that. But listening to it, I was like, okay, that was definitely a subtle shot at Troy, and that was a subtle shot at Monty. That, like you said, they're not going to say, yeah, Monty sucked. Yeah, Troy couldn't draft. Like, they're not going to say that, but they're going to say, like, hey, we want to get somebody that can do everything. And we appreciate those guys for, helping us get this, financial flexibility, this cap flexibility, and all these young assets that we've never had before. We thank Troy for that. And we thank Monty for, taking a shot on us, moving from Phoenix to Michigan. 100% agree with you there. But I'm happy that I'm not a crazy person. I might be a crazy person for watching it, the presser 4 times, but I'm happy that I'm not crazy where I thought I was like, oh, maybe I'm just like overreacting like I usually do.
No, that's not crazy at all. I think I can't remember the exact comment, but it was something along the lines of what could be perceived as a shot towards Monty or a shot towards Troy. Can't remember specifically, but I remember the person I was standing next to, after they had said that, he just kind of looks at me and goes, because it's kind of a thing that like everybody kind of catches on, but we're just kind of move on and, go accordingly. But everyone kind of does notice those types of things.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty wild. I was just like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I did want to kind of still stick with Trajan this next segment. And it was a question, I believe, by Corey asked him about getting back to the playoffs. So I kind of wanted to get your reaction because Trajan had a very meticulous answer about the playoffs. I don't have the full quote in front of me, but it was something like, we're not in any rush to get there. What were your thoughts with that?
I think it kind of speaks to the meticulous and calculated nature that I was talking about a little bit, where it seems like, that's not to say they're not going to, let's say, okay, at the end of the season, they're on the brink of a decision where they have to go, okay, are we going to really push for the playoffs, or are we going to start resting guys and tank for Cooper Flag, right? Let's say they're in that situation. I don't think they're going to go and tank for Cooper Flag. I think they would actually go and push for that play-in spot. But I also don't think that means right now they're going to go out and, like I said, trade for a Brandon Ingram or go out and try and sign a Paul George or something like that. I think it's going to be more like a Andrew Wiggins or a Gary Harris if they sign someone, right? Or I mean, you can look at any of the bad contracts in the NBA and go, okay, that guy could probably be a Piston this year, as long as they can still contribute on the court. I think the goal this year isn't necessarily playoffs or play in. I think it's development. And I think it kind of has to be development when you won 14 games and then 17 games the year before that. I know that it sucks to hear because the Pistons as an organization are storied, as we all have been beaten over the head with and been told at every single press conference and every single quote and every single whatever is, the Pistons are a storied franchise and there's a lot of banners, but it's true. There is a lot of banners. There is a lot of history with this team. And although I can't personally say I'm used to winning or seeing winning basketball, I know a lot of this fan base is. And they're really eager to get back to perennially being in the playoffs, perennially making deep playoff runs. And unfortunately, we're at a position right now where it's rock bottom. And you can't just go from rock bottom to like top of the mountain.
Yeah, I mean,
and no, go ahead.
To use a WWE phrase, you can't go from cruiserweight title to WWE title.
I mean, okay, great example. If we're gonna go WWE, you look at Jinder Mahal, right? If there's anybody in this chat or who's watching that remembers Jinder Mahal. Jinder Mahal was a wrestler on WWE television who, for his whole career, was seen as a jobber, which means he lost consistently. He was kind of a joke. Then, completely out of nowhere, they decided to make him fight for the WWE Championship, and he won. And it didn't go well. And now in 2024, he's not in the WWE. He's not seen as someone who's in the conversation of world championship level. And I think that's what he meant by skipping steps. I think if you were to go out and make a trade for a Paul or sign a Paul George or, things like that, I think that would be seen as skipping steps. That would be going from Jinder Mahal, the member of 3MB, to WWE champion. I think it, in the short term, it might give you great rewards, but in the long term, I don't know if it's really sustainable. I myself definitely thought they were going to go in the skipping steps route before Trajan really got settled, but I understand why he's going to do this, and I don't think it's going to be like 4 or 5 years before they're in the playoffs. It might just be 2.
Yeah, it's to your point that this was pre-steroid. Jinder Mahal when he was really skinny, then he came back and he was jacked. For whatever reason, WWE just love guys that use steroids. I don't know what it is. But to your point, the way I was having a conversation with a buddy of mine, and I said, right now the Pistons are crawling, and a lot of people want them to walk to the playoffs. I think before that they can get to that play-in spot, get to a playoff conversation, they have to learn how to win basketball games. I don't think they've had a 5-game winning streak probably since the Casey era in his first year.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, it's been a minute. I think a lot of fans are frustrated, and I 100% get it. We've been rebuilding going on 4 years. I will say the previous regime did kind of handicap the Pistons in terms of not really taking control of the asset management. And what I mean by that is selling on guys when they had high value where you could get maybe more draft picks, maybe younger guys, maybe better veterans. I think Troy could have taken on bad contracts the last 2 years, and he didn't do that. He refused to, which I get it. There's different philosophies, like you said. Trajan's more of a type A, Troy's a type B. I honestly think I wasn't mad at it. I think the goal should be to try to compete for the play-in. But if you don't do that, and there's the win total isn't 14 again, maybe it's 26, 27. I think fans would be okay and accepting of that. I just think right now when people hear we're not making the playoffs, they get upset, they get pissed off because we really haven't been a playoff team since Casey's first year.
I can't blame fans for not wanting to go the slow route. I can't. I completely understand at this point wanting to skip steps and wanting to go out and get those star players. The unfortunate reality is you can't, right? Like you can, but I don't know if that's really going to build a sustainable culture of winning, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And it's really funny because you were talking about, this previous regime handicapped. And I remember hearing the same thing when Troy Weaver was hired. So I remember when Troy was hired, there was like, oh, there's no star player to trade. You're starting off a rebuild with, Bruce Brown as your best asset and Luke Kennard as your best asset. And looking back, Bruce Brown and Luke Kennard sure aren't going to get you a Paul George, Russell Westbrook level return where you get like a Shea. But you definitely could have gotten a lot more than a Zanan Musa. I think the thing Pistons fans need to see in order to really trust Trajan and trust this new regime and era of Pistons basketball is by seeing it. because Troy did a lot of talking. He's known for having the best bars of any front office member in any Detroit sports in recent memory. Like, he would come out and say the most ridiculously hard quotes for no reason, and then would go out and trade Sadiq Bey for James Wiseman straight up.
Yeah.
And talk is one thing. And I think with Trajan already, you're kind of seeing that he values doing the work more than just talking. And I don't mean that to be a shot at Troy, but I think it's really just looking at what didn't work in the past and going, okay, we have to move differently. So they didn't do this press conference until Monty Williams was fired and Troy Weaver was fired. And they have front office members now in place, and they have an assistant coach in Fred Vincent in place. So they had a whole bunch of things happen before they even set up a press conference. And I understand fans are going to want to see immediate results. And I honestly, I think maybe not even like a 26, maybe like a 30 is where we start. You know, like I truly don't think this team is as bad as they were last year. I really don't. The talent is definitely there. It's about maximizing each of their skills and hiding their faults. So if you can maximize someone like Asar, where you have him in a role that prioritizes defense, athleticism, and playmaking, you're solid. If you have Jalen Duren in a role where maybe he's not relied on so much for like where he has to be the sole paint protector. I mean, honestly, when you got him minutes with Isaiah Stewart, he had a lot less pressure on him defensively. That's not to say he can't improve defensively. That absolutely has to be a thing that happens in order for him next season to be in those extension talks. But I think the goal with this team has to be maximizing your players and hiding their faults. And I think getting veterans who can help, like Cade needs shooting, Cade needs defense, and Cade needs like a rim runner. That's the most simple way to build a team around Cade Cunningham. Quite literally, give him floor spacing and give him one big guy who can block shots and rim run. He can throw lobs to, and I guarantee you, this team will double their win total. You know,
yeah,
if you just approach this with modern day NBA philosophy, it's really not that hard to get this team beyond 20 wins.
And I think it's possible given the cap space and given who we have as the new president. It's not a shot at Troy. I think Troy really valued drafting, and I respect that because we really haven't had someone that really hit on draft picks. What I will say is some people think that if we don't get a Brandon Ingram, if we don't get a Zach LaVine, it's just a failure of an offseason. And I don't really think it's that black and white. I think you can get guys like I was talking with Motor City Hoops. We're talking about like a Najee Marshall, like getting a guy that's kind of like under the radar, but is just a dog defensively, can hit threes, can get to the cup. Like there are guys out here in this free agency that can come in and be productive and get more wins on this team.
It's like it's difficult because we have been, and it's not Pistons fans' faults. You know, like you've heard the season ticket guys go, we have cap space coming, we have all these young players, and you know, this and that, and new president of basketball operations. So they've been sold a dream, and unfortunately, that dream is not reality. So the dream might be Brandon Ingram, reality might be, I don't know, Harrison Barnes and a first round pick. You know, I think Harrison Barnes is a quality NBA player, and he's a much better starter than Bojan Bogdanovic was this last year. Bojan was great the year before, but his Cavs are cooked. Point blank period. Like we that's the reason he didn't play in the playoffs. He's old and he's injured. If you can just get and he also, and I don't mean this as a shot at Bojan, but he was a cone, right? Like defensively, like he provided absolutely nothing on the defensive end. If you can just get guys who can do a little bit of both, you're doing a lot better. And I really don't think it will be as bad as I think a lot of Pistons, because I've seen a lot of the sky is falling and we're about to be in for another run of, misery again this year. I don't think that's necessarily the case.
Yeah, me either. I get it. Like I've been a Piston fan since the Grant Hill era, and I got spoiled as a kid growing up because I got to witness the going to work Pistons and then making the playoffs 6 straight years in the Eastern Conference Finals. And then I've experienced, Bill Davidson passing, Tom Gores buying the team, and it's just kind of been a revolving door of new people, new coaches coming in. And I get fans are frustrated. They want to make the playoffs. They want to get a playoff win. They want to get the monkey off their back. I get it. I think it will happen. And I think this team coming up into this upcoming season, it's going to be improved. Now, do I think we're going to get like stars like a Paul George or Brandon Ingram? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. But what I do know is we have a guy that actually has a plan, and he's going to try to execute it at the best of his abilities.
And I think that's like the most important thing, right? Like with Troy, I think a lot of fans were so eager for a rebuild. A lot of fans were so eager to see movement. A lot of fans were so eager to just see new that we didn't really stop and consider, okay, well, is this the right move? Because much like anybody else, everybody gets excited when they get a Woj or Shams notification, right? Like everybody is like, oh, the Detroit Pistons are trading da-da-da-da, or they're signing so-and-so. And it's really exciting. But I think with Troy, a lot of the things you have to look at when it comes to roster construction and the way he went about things was it just for the sole purpose of doing things? Because a lot of times it really felt like, I kind of need to move this guy, but I don't know if I want to, or I have to pay him and I don't know if I want to. So I'm just going to go and do this. And a lot of it seemed a lot of spur of the moment. Okay, we're doing this now. Boom, it happened. And now, well, we actually kind of like this player a little more. So we want to hold on to him, even though players or teams are calling and they're offering, a couple first round picks for this guy. We're going to actually hold on to him because now we see him as a part of our future. But then this very next year, you want to go and trade him. So it's
shit up, man.
It's a thing now where I think Trajan will have, if he acquires a player, I think when he acquires that player, he has a vision for that player in the context of the team. And I think that's really important.
I do too. I do too. We're gonna talk about the trade market in this next segment because we got the report from Jake Fisher that the Pistons were willing to explore the trade market, and we've talked about using cap space. We even mentioned some players, but what I know we already talked about it, but like initially when you first heard this report from Jake Fisher, were you for it? Were you against it? Were you kind of puzzled because of all the cap space that we do have?
No, it didn't surprise me at all. I mean, I have been hearing so much with the Pistons and the trade market. And initially it was in the sense of buying, but I think more now it's going to be not necessarily in the sense of selling, but acquiring assets or players that don't fit where they used to be and where other teams might not have the cap space to take on those types of players. And I think it'll be really interesting seeing all the moves they do, because I can tell you there's a lot of things I know. And with that being said, I have zero idea of what to expect for this offseason, right? Like I know of a bunch of different things that have been put out there. I don't really know if any of them are actually going to happen because there's just so much that's been put out there. A lot of it might be smoke, but a lot of it might generally be things that like they're interested in doing. The one thing I can say almost for certain is I'm almost 100% certain the Detroit Pistons will not be picking number 5.
Oh.
I think the trade market starts there for the Pistons, because if you look at their assets, it sounds to me, and this could change, but it sounds to me like they're really wanting to hold on to the young core. So what assets do you have to trade? You don't have a Boyan anymore to move off of. You don't have an Alec Burks anymore to move off of. What assets do you have to trade? And what does that do for your long-term future? And I think the Pistons like guys in this draft who they think they can get maybe at 10, maybe at 9, maybe at 11, or maybe even at 12, right? With OKC. Memphis, Utah, Chicago, OKC. Those are all names to keep an eye out for when it comes to Detroit Pistons and possibly trading the 5th pick. I mean, Trajan even said it himself during the presser. He goes, yeah, I think he had said something along the lines of like, we have the 5th pick if we do end up picking there. And I think that kind of gives, tips the hat a little bit. Like, I think it's very, 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 very plausible and very likely that they move off of the 5th pick and they might move back to 9, 10. I'm going to say 9 through 12. I could definitely see them picking 9 through 12.
That is something that I've talked about with different people on here. There's a lot of weird discourse with this draft. This is the weirdest draft that I've ever looked at the prospects, and I've looked at teams that, like, certain teams that want to trade up in the top 5 make no sense. Like, I saw a report that Miami and the Lakers wanted to trade up in the top 5. I'm like, why? Like, it's so weird to gauge, but it doesn't surprise me for the Pistons because, like you mentioned, maybe they like a guy around that 10 to 12 range. And they could get him and maybe get an asset, maybe get a future draft pick. I think that would be more appealing for me as a fan to get a little bit something, and you don't have to pay the salary as high because you're trading a little bit out of the lottery or staying in the lottery.
It's interesting because like you take into account the fact that they have a cap expert on their team now, right? Someone who's renowned around the league for being really good at managing the cap, and something as simple as a rookie contract does change with every single pick. So like I said earlier, if you believe in someone like Cody Williams and you may want to take him at 5, but you also have the knowledge to know that other teams from, I don't know, 5 to 9 might not pick Cody Williams, and you can get an asset for taking, for moving back, you go and do that and you can still get the guy you want. And I think this is a draft where, and I think it's honestly it is a weird draft, but it's also a really fascinating draft because there is no consensus top 5, top 10, there is no real consensus. So everybody has to come to their own conclusions. And with teams having all their different scouting departments, different needs, et cetera, teams are going to come to a lot of different conclusions and are going to value players differently and might think this player is worth this pick and might think they need to move to a specific pick to get that player. Like, let's say, I don't know, Chicago loves, Matas Buzelis. They know the Pistons at 5 have interest in Matas. The Pistons might like Matas, but they might not love Matas to the point where, okay, we can go to 11 and still get someone who we also really like. Maybe a Jacoby Walter. Maybe I'm not gonna say his name, but Saloon. I think his last name is Saloon or Saloon. Salaun. Yeah, there you go. Saloon. Maybe they like him and they think, okay, well, we can move back and get him, and we think he's maybe on the same level as a Matas, right? Or a Ron Holland. There's just a lot of variation when it comes to this draft, and I think it's going to be a draft that has a lot of movement for sure.
Just saw a comment. Did you see they did like this draft thing with Matas, and he couldn't name who the first overall pick was. He's like, what year was the Jalen Green draft again? I was just like, yeah. Pistons fans like,
so,
hey, like, no, I'm good.
It's tough. It's tough, man, because I like Matas. I think people are looking at the shooting from his time in the G League and taking that at face value. But if you look before that, in high school, he shot the ball excellent. He might have just had a rough year at shooting because that's kind of a really big jump going from high school to NBA 3-point line. Because that's what it is in the G League is the NBA 3-point line. So I think Matas is a good prospect, but I think with Pistons fans, they're really fixated on 2 things now, which is one, I guess 3. Arn-Tellem connection, the shooting splits, and now the Jalen Green comment, right? Where he goes, oh, it was the Jalen Green draft. I have a pro tip for any prospect out there. If you are a high school basketball player, not hoping, who knows they're going to go pro, and you don't want to go to Detroit, say something really positive about anybody else in the 2021 NBA draft class, and I promise you, you won't have to worry about going to Detroit. Because the fan base, I will say, for as bad as this team is, will live and die by Cade Cunningham. So I hope if Matas does get selected here, he has a comment where he's gonna make up for that, because they don't play about Cade here.
No. I think he said, like, if you would have said, like, it would have been crazy if you would have said, like, the Franz Wagner draft. Like, I couldn't imagine, like, Twitter today, because that just would have been, like, wild. But Amin and Asar, like, literally named everyone in their draft class from 1 to 30. It just kind of tells you, like, what kind of basketball sickos those guys are.
It's interesting because with Matas, I know I was watching his interview with Kevin O'Connor, and I think he said he didn't start watching basketball like really closely until high school. So there might just honestly be a lot of like missed things with his knowledge of the NBA. So I can't fault him too much, but I mean, everybody knows it was Caden. So
yeah. Got Ashton in here. Shout out, man. Hope you're doing well, man.
Shout out Ashton, man.
For sure. I wanted to talk about coaching because Woj put out a tweet, and I kind of talked about these coaches this week on this channel, but I want to get your perspective. Out of all the coaches that Woj did put out, JB Bickerstaff, Micah Nori, Sean Sweeney, which one of these guys do you think would make the most sense for the Pistons?
I don't want to speak too conclusively because right, nothing has happened yet.
Yeah.
But I do think it's interesting that James, and I think Koo said this as well, James, who's very close with the Pistons organization, had a list of candidates that didn't include JB Bickerstaff. And then Woj threw in JB Bickerstaff at the end, and with the thing of he can interview before anybody else can interview. That's not to say that I don't think the Pistons are interested. They might be, and that's exactly why I say I don't want to speak too conclusively, because who knows? Maybe in 2 weeks they go and hire JB Bickerstaff. But from my knowledge, the main names with this team right now, at least, James Borrego, Chris Quinn, Micah Nori, and I think that's it. Actually, yeah, those are the 3 names. And in my personal opinion, can't really go wrong. I think all 3 names, and maybe on paper this sounds like a hot take, I think all of those 3 names are an upgrade over Monty Williams last year. Not to say Monty's not a good coach. Monty just maybe wasn't in the situation where he was going to maximize players and really listen to someone like Cade, and make a team with a system that really favors his play style. I think any of James Borrego, Micah Nori, Sean Sweeney, Chris Quinn, all of them seem like guys who are forward thinkers when it comes to how they approach basketball. I know Sean Sweeney wrote a book about X's and O's and about everything you need to know from an NBA coach. So that just kind of shows you like the basketball mind he is. I know that like there is countless stories of players really taking a strong liking to him. And I think I saw a story earlier today where I think it was Kevin Garnett who they were in a film session, and I think the players were talking, and Sean Sweeney was trying to talk to them, and he told them to, without saying, I think he basically said, like, shut the fuck up. He knows what he's talking about, right? And for someone like Kevin Garnett to command a room for Sean Sweeney kind of tells you the respect he has amongst players. So I think, in my personal opinion, I think he's probably my favorite if I were to have one for the Pistons coaching job. But I also know that the Cleveland situation right now is really in flux. And if they go with Kenny Atkinson over James Borrego, I I would have to think James Borrego is pretty high on the list of Pistons coaching candidates. So we'll see.
Yeah. I know talking to some Pelican guys, they're like, please don't take James Borrego. You've already taken enough from us. Like, just stop. Because like taking like our cap guy, our shooting coach, our GM, we have nothing left. Like, stop. I will say though, from a head coaching perspective, Trajan said something very interesting, and I think it's noteworthy. He said, I want a coach that's going to come in and really focus on developing, and a coach that can relate to these guys. And I honestly think that's Sean Sweeney to me, because Sean Sweeney seems like a basketball sicko to me.
He does. And he's like that perfect mix of basketball sicko, but also still seems like a people person when it comes to connecting with the players and really, garnering that respect. I think during his time in Detroit, I think Isaiah Stewart was someone he was really close with, right? So that already shows you he can connect with players on a personal level that maybe Monty didn't. So I think that really shows a lot.
That and his time in, I think it's really telling that Jason Kidd has had 2 head coaching jobs in Milwaukee and in Dallas, and that was his first call. Like, I need this guy on my staff. Like, I think some people forget that Sweeney was in Milwaukee before Giannis was Giannis. Like, traveling with him degrees, helping him train, like, I'm not going to say Sean Sweeney is the reason Giannis is who he is, because I think Giannis has tremendous amount of work ethic, but I do think Sweeney was in the gym late at night helping him get better. I even saw an article, I think it was the same article that you read. It was about Josh Green saying he was coming in late to the gym, and Sweeney was still in there like watching film like 9-10 o'clock at night. And he was like, he was always there, and like he was helping me like rebound the ball. And I think that's what the Pistons need. They need someone that it's going to come in here, really help these young guys develop their game. Because to your point, I don't really think, I've always said Monty Williams is not a coach that you hire when you're a rebuilding team. He's a coach to maybe get you out of that first round of the playoffs. He always seemed like a playoff win now coach, which why the hire last year was kind of like a head scratcher, because we heard like Charles Lee and others. For me, like, if those are the candidates, I like Chris Quinn, but I don't know if he's going to leave Miami. I just don't. I like Mike Inori. I think he's kind of cut from the same cloth as Sweeney, but to me, I think with Trajan's comments, it's probably going to be an up-and-coming assistant if I had to guess.
I would think so too, which kind of it makes the James Borrego thing a little, I guess, confusing the way Monty is, but he's also not really status-wise the same level as Monty, right? I know a lot of people give him a hard time for how Charlotte went down, but I think that might have to do more with where that roster was at the time versus, him as a head coach. So I think it's interesting to see how that plays out in Cleveland, but I really don't think any of the candidates mentioned are bad. I think honestly, any of them would be very welcome here in Detroit.
I do. I do too. I think some people, as I had mentioned, like their job history, and I said, yeah, Nori and Sweeney were here in Detroit, and people got like mad. I was like,
yeah, I saw that too.
I was like, why would you be mad? Like, Sweeney was just in the NBA Finals, and Nori was in the Western Conference Finals. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, Mike Inori took over as a kind of interim acting head coach. I know Chris Finch was still there, but he wasn't able to really be as physically involved because of it was a knee injury, right? Like, I think he tore his ACL, or I can't remember what happened.
Some player dove into his leg.
Yeah, I think it was Mike Conley went into his leg. So you saw Mike Inori kind of take a lot of that presence that Finch had. So I think Mike Inori is a great guy, a great candidate for this position. My brother calls him basketball Ted Lasso, with kind of just the way he goes about things and the way he speaks. And I definitely can see it. And I think that type of personality also super welcome in Detroit. And I think that's the type of encouraging voice that's going to do a lot more than maybe someone like Monty, who seems a little more strict, and not to say strict is a bad thing, but it didn't seem, from everything I've heard, it didn't seem like he took the time to really get on their level, you know. And I think
Kind of
Mike
an
and Nori could definitely do that.
kind of an ego, if you will, kind of someone that is established, knows he is established, and doesn't want to get his hands dirty. If that's like kind of the correct word, like get his hands dirty, helping these guys get better. I always felt that with Monty, which he knows he's a well-established coach in the league, and developing isn't really something. When I think of Monty Williams, I don't think of development. I don't. When I look at guys like a Sweeney, a Nori, a Chris Quinn, who I know Chris Quinn's very heavily involved with development, even Sam Cassell, which I know a lot of people are talking about. And I'm kind of nervous. Like if they wanted Sam Cassell, I think they have to act now, because I saw a report last night that JJ Redick is like basically like gonna fly to him for him to go to LA, which it's just like I'd love Sam Cassell in Detroit.
I would too, and I know a lot of fans have mentioned his name quite a bit when it comes to the coaching search. I would have to say temper your expectations a little bit though, because I haven't heard that name myself. I haven't heard that name reported by others. So I wouldn't really put too many expectations on it, because I honestly, everywhere I go, every comment section I go to, when it's about the Pistons head coaching vacancy, they're talking about Sam Cassell as the next Pistons head coach. And I have to say, don't put that expectation into your brain, because you will be disappointed.
Yeah, the report I saw was JJ Redick trying to get Rajon Rondo and Sam Cassell.
Yeah,
which I even James Borrego, I think was a name that he was trying to get to LA, which wouldn't really surprise me. I mean, first time head coach, he's going to need a lot of basketball knowledge around him. But the comments that I've been seeing, like on my social media, isn't any of these guys. It's Mark Jackson, which I'm not going to get into the politics of why Mark Jackson isn't in the NBA. I'm going to let you guys look it up and learn why he's not. And you guys can kind of formulate opinion that way. But that's who I've been seeing on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Mark Jackson. Why not Mark Jackson? I'm not going to get into it, but I think they go younger.
That one go.
Yeah. So one of the next segments I wanted to get into was another report from Jake Fisher in his piece that he had. And it was the Detroit Pistons are evaluating Isaiah Stewart's trade market. So I wanted to know what you thought of this reporting and what your initial thoughts were that the Pistons are evaluating what they could possibly get for Isaiah Stewart.
It's a tough one, because I know that I heard a lot about a lot of teams having significant interest in Isaiah Stewart at the deadline. And I know the Pistons were listening. Obviously, they didn't, make a move. And I know now I'm hearing the same thing. I think the Pistons are definitely looking at acquiring a defensive big, to whether it's to take Jalen Duren's starting place temporarily, or like help his development, whatever it is. I know that's one of their priorities this offseason. With that being said, I truly think an Isaiah Stewart trade would be a mistake. And it's a thing of, I understand he's a valuable asset, and I could understand wanting to maximize on valuable assets. However, Isaiah Stewart is someone who has so much switchability on pretty much every aspect of his skill set that I think giving up on someone while he's like 22, 23 is a little too early. And I know his extension's also about to kick in, which I think is about like $16 million going into the cap.
Mm-hmm.
You still have a lot of cap space regardless. And I would rather see them grow with Isaiah Stewart, because if we want to talk about culture, Isaiah Stewart's one of the main culture guys. I mean, I remember talking to a lot of the Cruise players in the beginning of the season, and they would get asked like, who's been a voice that you look to, and who's a voice that has helped you with the transition. A lot of, especially the two-way guys. I remember at the time it was Malcolm Kazalon and Jared Roden, Buddy Boeheim, et cetera, et cetera. Almost every single player I talked to mentioned Isaiah Stewart as someone that really helped them a lot with the process of getting acclimated in Detroit, getting acclimated, if they played on summer league, like, getting used to like playing with certain guys or knowing what to do. Isaiah Stewart really took the time to get to know and work with these guys. And like, he's going into year 5, right?
Mhm.
Year 5. That's not normal for like year 5 guys, right? Like, he's 23, I think, and already exuding that type of leadership. I really think that would be a hit to the culture. I know Cade also is a leader, but I think having them both together is a great foundation. If we're talking about foundation, a great foundation for your locker room and for the culture you're trying to build. So I understand, the trade market probably for Isaiah Stewart is pretty good, but if I were Trajan Langdon, I would probably hold on to him.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting conversation because I think when fans hear evaluating the trade market, they think that Trajan's just gonna fire off the first offer he gets. Which the way I took this reporting from Jake Fisher was the Pistons are just seeing what the value is. I don't think they're going to trade him because, to your point, vocal leader. I think Jalen Duren said the same thing on the Pistons had a podcast earlier this year, and he said when he first came in, Duren or Stewart was very instrumental of helping him get ready for the NBA. Not so much vocally, but on the physical side of the game. Stewart was basically like pushing him down to the ground like every time. I guess. Haven't seen the footage, but that'd be actually really funny to watch. I think fans, when you talk about Stewart, it's 50-50. I think he's very valuable to what you said. Switchable defender, very good defender, one of the team's best defenders. But he kind of gets put into his box because he's starting right now. And fans, I think their opinions would change if he was off the bench, getting 20, 25 minutes a night versus possibly starting. I think their tune would change if he wasn't in the starting lineup each and every night.
This is actually something I talked about with Koo on Locked On Pistons is like, I think the way some people perceive Isaiah Stewart would change, like you said, if they were to just get him out of the starting 4 position. Because I think the starting power forward position for Isaiah Stewart really limits the things that he can do on a basketball court. I think he can shoot the ball, and he's shown a lot of progression with shooting the ball. That's great. But at least this last season, it really felt like he was pigeonholed into a role where he primarily had to be in the corner and primarily had to be a floor spacer. And I think if you used his skill set to where he can space the floor versus he has to space the floor every single, possession, I think that would really open up a lot of things where you can get Isaiah Stewart to some back to the basket, possessions. You could get Isaiah Stewart on a roll rather than always, fading or popping. I think Isaiah Stewart, even like, and this is just on the offensive end, I think his offensive skill set could really be maximized if you were to just let him be Isaiah Stewart rather than be what felt like they were trying to make him like PJ Tucker, right? And like that's just not his game. He can shoot the ball. That's great. But make it where that's an option, not the only one of many options rather than the only option, So I really would like to see Isaiah Stewart get to play more of his game versus the game that they've kind of molded him into.
Yeah, I talked with Motor City Hoops about this, about the Pistons drafting players and putting them in positions where they're not fully comfortable in. I'm not saying that Stu isn't comfortable playing kind of a stretch 4 position, but I think to your point, let him play bully ball as a backup center. I think he would thrive, like a Naz Reid role, if you will. I think that would be a perfect role for him.
That's exactly like watching Minnesota in the playoffs this year. I was like, man, the Pistons have this right here if they just knew how to use them. And I know during the Casey era, a lot of things Pistons fans would complain about were like playing players out of position or playing players not where their roles were maximized. Like I remember the Sekou years where, looking back, maybe Casey was trying to do him a favor, but they would complain like Sekou's just standing in a corner, right? I kind of felt the same way about Isaiah Stewart, at least offensively this year, where like, yes, his shooting numbers improved and his volume improved. That's fantastic. But why is he only seen as a floor spacer? You're putting out lineups where he is literally the only floor spacing Cade has. And that's just not good for Cade. That's not good for the rest of the team. And that's not good for Isaiah Stewart. I know Isaiah Stewart can shoot the ball. Isaiah Stewart knows he can shoot the ball, but that doesn't mean he only shoots the ball. You know, I think you have to get a lot more creative. And I think Isaiah Stewart is a perfect player of like, if you were to just get creative and put him on a winning team, people who say he's not valuable or want him off the team, their opinions would change just like that if he was on a Minnesota or if he was on a Denver, especially Denver actually, or OKC. Any of these teams, Isaiah Stewart's perception is completely flipped, but people only see what's kind of put out there, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, what they watch. Like when we get a new player to trade. I'll use Hamidou Diallo, for example. When Hamidou came to the Pistons, everyone's like, who the hell's that? 2 weeks later, I love Hamidou. Best cutter in the league. Like, if you just watch one team and you're not familiar with their game, you're going to have a different perception. I think the perception that Pistons fans have is Isaiah Stewart's just a low-quality stretch forward, and I don't think that's part of his game. I think he has a game where he can bang down low in the post. I think he has a game where he could put the ball on the ground and get to the basket. I think he's a very underrated passer. They don't really use him in those DHO situations, which I think they should. I think they could do double DHOs with him and Durr, and that would just confuse everybody. But that's getting a little bit too creative, probably. I think he's a good player. I think this reporting from Jake Fisher was just kind of Pistons are seeing what they could possibly get, see if New Orleans is still interested, see if Dallas is still interested, see if contending teams are interested, because he's a good player. I know Jack Kelly put out a highlight clip of him just being like the quote-unquote Giannis stopper, which was very well done by Jack. Shout out to him. I think he's valuable, man. I really like him, and I know I'm rambling a little bit, but I think it would be a mistake to trade a guy that's kind of like the culture setter, if you will.
Yeah, I really think, I mean, and I don't mean any of this to take away from Jake's reporting, because I know I know that like that has been explored, right? Like hearing what teams value him as. And I know teams around the league want Isaiah Stewart on their team because they see how switchable he is, how creative they can get with his offensive skill set. But I think unless it's something you just cannot absolutely under no circumstances turn down, I really think keeping Isaiah Stewart is good both in the short and long term for sure.
Yeah, I think so too. One of the next segments that I wanted to get into was free agency. I know it hasn't started yet. I've been asking guests that have been coming on this podcast every week to give me one free agent you want the Detroit Pistons to sign this summer.
If you asked me this question like last week, I would have probably a completely different answer. If I had one free agent I want the Pistons to sign, that's a good question. Man, I see. If you were to ask me who I want them to trade for, I'd have an answer right off the top of my head. As far as who I want them to sign, I'm gonna go with D'Angelo Russell.
Oh,
do I think that's gonna happen? Probably not. But I think D'Angelo Russell is a player that could play well next to Cade. His shooting, though sometimes is streaky, for the most part, he's shown the fact that he can shoot the ball. And especially after the trade deadline this year, he was like on a heater, right? I think he's that perfect transitional starting guard where you can start him until Ivy's ready, or if Ivy never is ready, then you have a pretty good shooting guard next to Cade. Because I think Cade needs someone who can take the playmaking load off of him a little bit. Even with Ivy this last year, part of that development that we're wanting to see with Ivy is turning down the turnovers. And with Ivy, everybody knows he's one of the fastest players in the league. He goes just like that. But also, as one of the faults of being one of the fastest players of the league, he moves too fast for other players sometimes, and his brain and his body are not always moving in the same way. So I think D'Angelo Russell is someone you could start until Ivy's ready. And I think if Ivy never is ready, I think he's a solid NBA starter who can give you at bare minimum like 18 points per game, right? And I think that's a major improvement over starting Killian Hayes or starting an Alec Burks next to Cade Cunningham. So if I were to go with anybody, I would go with D'Angelo Russell. Do I think that's going to happen? Probably not. But I do like the hypothetical fit. But just for the sake of getting this agenda off, if I were to say the Pistons should trade for one player, and I said this on Twitter, you might have seen it, Keon Ellis from Sacramento.
Okay.
One of my favorite play, and it's not someone who's gonna like change the culture day one or whatever. He is, and if you're watching this and you don't know Keon Ellis, look up Keon Ellis defensive highlights. That man is a defensive demon, and he also isn't completely incapable of being an offensive player. Do I think he's going to be a starting shooting guard next to Cade? No, but I think he's one of the very best perimeter defenders in the NBA. And I know we focus a lot on spacing and a lot on shooting, which is very important. And it's definitely something, whether or not they go out and be buyers, the Pistons have to prioritize getting shooting around Cade Cunningham this offseason. Point blank, period. You cannot go into next season with the same exact spacing you had last year. But another major fault this team has had is defense. They struggle severely with perimeter defenders, and interior defenders. And I think getting guys in place who can guard players on the perimeter, and then you have someone who can guard them on the interior as well, is going to make a huge, huge improvement for the Pistons, because they have been piss poor defensively the last few years. And I know it's mind-boggling that last year, I remember over and over and over again getting beaten over the head with the "we're prioritizing defense" quotes, and then they just don't go out and get players who are good defenders. The best defender they had was someone they drafted at 5 last year with Asar Thompson. You go and say, we're going to go prioritize defense, and your main free agency or trade acquisitions last year were Monte Morris, Joe Harris, negative defenders. So I think Keon Ellis would be a great fit in Detroit. Do I think Sacramento is going to trade him? Probably not. But if they're really trying to move off of one of these contracts, maybe he'd get thrown in.
It's so funny you mentioned his name, because part of one of the jobs I have is covering the Motor City Cruise. I remember him just giving the Cruise so much fits defensively. Like, I was like, who the hell is this kid? Why is he in the G League? He's like, I think he had like 8 steals in a game against the Cruise and like 35 points and hit like 6 threes. I'm like, who is this kid? I was just like, wow. I haven't heard that name in quite some time. A free agent I just thought of, and maybe some people like it, some people don't. I think Obi Toppin makes a lot of sense for this team.
Oh, that's a good one.
I think Obi Toppin can be a rim runner. He can be a lob threat. He can shoot threes. He can put the ball on the floor. He's just abysmal defensively. But if you're okay with that, maybe he comes off your bench. Maybe he starts. Who knows? Maybe it's just for a short-term deal. Maybe a 1 to 2 year deal, kind of like what he did with Indiana. I think offensively, if you're looking for a power forward or a 4-man to pair in the starting lineup or off the bench, he could make a lot of sense for the Pistons.
I agree. I honestly, my pick would have been Najee Marshall, but I saw that got picked already, so I had to get a little creative on the spot, just because I was like, man, I really think though he would be a great signing and is a probable signing if they were to go out and get a little aggressive in free agency.
Yeah, I mean, and I've liked Obi Toppin probably since like his draft year. And I don't know. I think there's something there to where, you know, he could come in and just put up points instantly playing with a guard like Cade. But
you know, Cade would love throwing lobs to Obi for sure.
Oh man, it would be Sports Center Bleacher Report every night if
for sure
you had him in here.
For sure.
I was kind of sad with the Malik Monk stuff, because I kind of put like all my stock on Malik Monk coming to the Pistons, and that did not happen. So now my stock is going into Gary Trent. So he's probably gonna gets signed by Toronto. Who knows?
I mean, yeah, I know Gary Trent didn't really have a good season this past year, but I've been a fan of his since he was in Portland, and I would definitely think that would be a great signing here in Detroit. I think it's pretty likely he stays in Toronto, but who knows? We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, as long as he's not golfing and saying F Detroit like Austin Reeves, I think there's still hope, Zar. I think there still is. So one of the last questions I wanted to ask you was a draft question. And I've been asking a lot of guests that have been coming on this podcast the same one. Who do you want the Detroit Pistons to draft next week?
It's interesting because at the start of the season, my guy was Cody Williams, right? And that was with me watching like minimal stuff. I was just like, okay, 6'8" wing, 7'1" wingspan. Like that's a layup, right? And his brother's already good. That's a layup. And then I was like, oh, I talked to like a lot of my friends who are really good draft experts, like some scouts. And they're like, I don't know how I like Cody Williams, 2 attempts per game. That's not really good volume. Doesn't really show that he's really a great shooter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I kind of waned off on Cody Williams. I think right now I'm at the point where I do believe in Cody Williams as a prospect. And I definitely think he's someone who could be a Jeremy Grant archetype. And I think if there is a probable pick for the Pistons, I would say it's Cody Williams. But for the sake of being different, I'm going to go and say Tristan da Silva. Tristan da Silva is someone who will not go 5. But if the Pistons, let's say, trade back to like 12, I really like Tristan da Silva for this team. He is a 3 or 4. He gives you a lot of what maybe someone like Simone Fontecchio gives you, but also he's 23, which is, I guess, older for a rookie, but I'm not scared of that as someone who, if I were the one making a pick, I wouldn't be scared by that because I think he's shown improvement each year he's played. And I think there's a lot to tap into with his skill set. We're sure he might not be an all-star, but I think he's someone who could maybe end up being a fringe all-star. I see him get compared. I've seen him get compared to Franz Wagner a couple of times. And I definitely can see that comparison. So I think for the sake of being different, I'll go with Tristan da Silva. I think his shooting upside is there. And I like him overall as a prospect. I like his size, and I like his overall feel for the game.
So I go back and forth every day. If they keep 5, this might get boos in the chat. This is my feeling today. Ron Holland. And I know it doesn't make sense. I know it doesn't make sense. I know people they want Bazelis, they want Connect, they want Cody. I think out of him and Tyler Smith in the G League Ignite, I think those are the 2 guys that I see taking progressions in development. I think Modest is going to have to gain a little bit of weight, in my personal opinion, from watching a lot of him this season. To get better, it might take him maybe a year or 2 to really figure it out. I think Ron Holland defensively with the star would just be nasty, man. It would be filthy.
Agreed. I think Ron Holland's someone who's gotten a lot of unfair criticism thrown his way, and I think a lot of people have not really taken enough stock into Ron Holland because he's someone who was seen as the number 1 prospect in this draft, and to this day, a lot of people whose draft opinions I really respect, who do nothing but analyze NBA draft prospects, etc., still have Ron Holland as their number 1 guy in this class. And I think that's for a reason. His tools are ridiculous. He's an insane athlete, a really great defender. He gives you maybe, yes, a lot of what Asar gives you, but he also showed a lot more offensive production than Asar did at OTE in the G League. I know his shooting splits may not have been that great, but you just got to buy on the potential with Ron Holland. So I would not fault any team that picked Ron Holland at any point in the draft. And I also have one more name for you. and this is also not a name they would pick at 5 or maybe even in like the mid-teens. Ryan Dunn is one of my favorite prospects in this draft. And if anyone is familiar, maybe they'll get some boos in the chat or in the comment section, because yes, Ryan Dunn, not a finished prospect, right? Like he's not a finished project. He is primarily a defensive demon, the same way Keon Ellis is, right? And I don't know if you can tell, but you can kind of see what I value when it comes to building a basketball team. And I really think getting someone like Ryan Dunn with Fred Vinson, the best shooting coach in the NBA, would do wonders. Like if you want to talk about the Herb Jones trajectory, take a look at Ryan Dunn and go, I don't know, at 21, trade, I don't know, your 54th pick, couple seconds to go get a Ryan Dunn. And I almost guarantee you'll see results by the end of the season, just because his defensive feel is ridiculous and his athleticism matches. So if you can just get him to have a perimeter shot, you have a very, very, very solid role player in the league and one of the best perimeter defenders in the association.
Yeah, he's the guy that I think a lot of people got put on because Sam Vecini was talking about him on his podcast. I watched, I want to say at least just a highlight reel because I saw his name in passing, and I see what you see with the Keon Ellis and the Ryan Dunn. I see the archetype that you're going for. And to your point, I think maybe the Pistons could gamble given they have Fred Vinson, trusting in his ability to develop guys that aren't known as shooters coming out of college, but you mentioned, like Trey Murphy, Herb Jones. Trey Murphy was kind of a pretty good shooter.
Trey Murphy has shown improvement on the other side of the ball, but yeah.
You get what I'm saying. I don't know why I said Trey Murphy. I was thinking that Herb Jones.
Herb Jones, yeah.
But definitely, I think I see where you're going. I like those picks. If they were to trade down, though, I have my eye on two guys, and they both play in the front court. Khalil Ware out of Indiana, I think makes a whole lot of sense if you want to stretch big, and Deron Holmes out of Dayton. Deron Holmes is just I would not be surprised if he goes like the Sacramento. He's just a monster, man.
He's someone who I think fans on draft night will be surprised where he goes, because I think he could go as high as 12. And I think his skill set is invaluable. And I think he's someone who in a couple of years we could go, well, why did he go at the draft pick where he went, right? I think he can end up being one of those types of players where maybe, he might not be an all-star, but he's going to be really, really valuable for some really good teams.
Yeah, obviously, like if I know we're kind of like going in all different places. Like if Reed Shepard's at 5, I'm probably taking him. If Shay's at 5, I'm probably taking him. Who knows what happens with Klingon? Sounds like the Hawks might just trade down and the Spurs go to 1. The Spurs get Sarr and Wibby together, I'll probably scream. It's just like the next iteration of Tim Duncan and David Robinson, probably.
Yeah. That would be a great time to be a San Antonio Spurs fan. I will say, because like, man, getting Sarr and Wemby back to back, that's the type of stuff that only happens in like 2K.
Yeah, like it's absolutely wild. I do not have any more segments, but there are some people that would like to ask you some questions if you do have a couple of minutes to spare.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Man, it's so crazy. I'm so excited for the draft. But this comes from Steven Hudson. What changes would you guys like to see? Do you really think Duren should be the starter with all of his defensive flaws?
You want me to take this one first?
For sure, man.
As far as changes, point blank period, give Cade Cunningham some spacing. I feel so bad for him when I watch him a lot of times. I should not feel bad for a generational prospect when I watch him play on the NBA court. But I do, right? Like, I don't like, even like sometimes when I'm at home, I'll see my mom, like if she's watching the game as well. She'll go, "Oh man, I feel really bad for Cade," and like that's just not something that should be a thing, right? And I know some people, I was about to go a little negative there, but some people have put on the, oh well, let's see what you could get for Cade Cunningham and all this other stuff. Uh, that's not going to get you anywhere. I think the number one priority this offseason, yes, is to acquire assets. But before any of that, make sure the players that you do acquire help Cade Cunningham and his development, because he is still a young player who needs development. And I think if you can get players who really help his skill set grow and help him take pressure off of himself, where he's not feeling like he has to do everything in order for this team to win a basketball game, then that's a great way to improve this team. And I think if I were to put it just very broadly, get players who fit Cade Cunningham's play style. That's like the number one change I'd like to see. Yeah. And then as far as Duren, I think that's a fair question. Duren, I saw someone tweet, and this is like true insane hater of the year behavior, tweeted a 27-minute long video of Jalen Duren getting lost on defense. And I understand that Duren has struggled on that end, but I can also remember the beginning of the season where he actually was making a positive impact on defense. So I kind of wonder how much of it is linked to his ankle injuries. And, because that was a constant thing for him, where maybe he wants to try, but he feels like if he does try, he's more likely to get injured. But I don't know if Duren really is for sure the starter this year. I think that's a completely fair question. And I think if I were Trajan Langdon, I would look at someone like I said with a transitional. I would look at a transitional starting center for the Detroit Pistons, because I think Jalen Duren is someone who has been thrown into the fire and thrown into expectations way too quickly, because he's still younger than a lot of prospects in this year's draft class, right? And he was drafted in 2022. He is someone who I believe has immense potential, and I think it gets clouded with his flaws. And I think, like I said earlier, if you were to just be able to hide your best prospects' flaws and develop them to where they can now take those starter minutes back, then I think that's a win. So I think, yeah, I would look at getting maybe a Jonas Valanciunas or a player along those lines, of Steven Adams, not someone who's going to take away the long-term future of Jalen Duren, but maybe someone who can set the foundation for Jalen Duren and be an example for Jalen Duren to learn from.
I think you hit on every point that Stephen was asking. The only thing I'll add to that is floor spacing. That's what I'd like to see. More perimeter defenders, more wings. For the Duren question, I don't think he automatically is going to be the starter. Pistons could just mess around and do a sign and trade for Nick Claxton. I mean, they could do that. They could dip their toe in the Isaiah Hartenstein sweepstakes, even though they haven't been linked to him as of late. They were a couple of months ago, but it sounds like a lot of teams don't want to like get into the 80, 90, $100 million for him, which I get. I honestly think bringing in another center would be good for his development, because to your point, he was kind of put in the fire and just like, hey, you're going to be playing 30 minutes. I thought the Taj Gibson signing should have been made last year. You needed a veteran center, but I personally think that with all of his defensive flaws, a lot of it were the ankle injuries. A lot of it was playing 30 minutes when he's never played 30 minutes, not having a veteran to help him out, watch film with. Wouldn't be surprised if they do look to bring in more of an established, more of a grown up at that center position for Cade Cunningham and company.
Yeah, agreed. And I think one more name I'll throw out there along the lines of like a Nick Claxton, because I know they're linked to Claxton, but I personally just have the feeling they might strike out on the center, free agent market. If that's the case, I know there's been talks of New York maybe wanting to move off of Mitchell Robinson, because I know that they're pretty confident in re-signing Isaiah Hartenstein, and I think they might look at maybe Jericho Sims as like that backup big, right, or a Precious Achua. So if New York's really trying to look at getting off of Mitchell Robinson, I think that's also someone you could look at in terms of taking Duran's starting spot, temporarily. Because I think long term you do have a really good center in Jalen Duran, but you have to build that foundation and you have to develop his skill set to where he can play those minutes. And I think he just might not have been ready yet.
Yeah, I agree with that. I wouldn't be surprised if they did the opposite and just gave Duran this starting spot. I think everything's on the table, and they're probably going to evaluate everything.
Yeah.
This isn't really a question, but this is from Devon. He did want to give you a shout out. So just wanted to
Shout
put it
out
on
to
the
my
real
guy
quick.
Devon, man. I that's been my guy for a long time. I really appreciate that. There's a lot of times where I want to say things more than I really appreciate that, because like there's so much more going on in my brain, but I truly appreciate that.
So shout out to Devon. He's on here every weekend. He says, I'm at work, but I'm gonna watch it when I get off work. I was like, bro, like you're the best.
This is my
Um
guy.
we have another draft question, which I think it's a possibility. It's a kind of a trade question coming from SB. So his question for you would be: do you think the Pistons could work out a trade with the Blazers for their 7th and 14th pick for our 5th pick plus something?
Yeah, I mean, if the Blazers really like someone at 5 and they know they're either going 5 or that player's going either 5 or 6. And again, I apologize if you hear my dog in the background. He's a puppy, so bear with me. But if the Blazers really like someone at 5 and they think he might be gone by 7, then yeah, I could definitely see that going along the lines. But I think if the Pistons were to trade with Portland, including the 5th pick, you'd probably look more towards a Jeremy Grant in 14 versus, um, 5 for 7. Because I can't imagine because as far as I know, Portland really likes, and you're gonna have to say his name again.
TJ so
French.
long.
There we go. I know they're really interested in him. So maybe Detroit, and I know Detroit also likes him. So, maybe that's a possibility, but I can't really imagine a world where they're really desperate unless they really also, I've heard Donovan Clingan they like a lot. If they want to go and get Donovan Clingan, then yeah, I could see that 7 and 14. But if not, and they just want to move up to 5 for someone they generally like and don't think will be available at 7, then yeah, that 7 and 14 for 5 could definitely go down.
I've had conversations with Portland's are, and they're the weirdest team to me. I don't understand their roster. Like, you signed DeAndre Ayton, you gave Jeremy Grant the bag, you got Scoot Henderson, you have like these vets, and then you have like these young guys, and it's just like it's not even a middle of the pack team. Like, I don't know if they're trying to rebuild or trying to make a playoff.
It's definitely like that weird purgatory where like it's like, yes, they keep tanking, quote unquote, but they also keep ending up at 7. Like they had 2 last year with Scoot, but even Scoot didn't really show like what you wanted to see from Scoot. So it's weird. It's a really weird team, and they have no cap space either, which is really like fascinating for a rebuilding team.
Yeah, to answer SB's question though, because I've been talking to myself with like Portland for like probably like the last year. I'm like, I don't know what they're trying to accomplish, but maybe the Pistons have a reunion tour with Jeremy Grant. Pistons have the cap space to absorb it. Now, I'm not advocating for that, but I think it could be a possibility. Maybe if they want to do 7 and 14 for 5 and something. I don't know what something is, but it could be a possibility. Jeremy Grant does have some familiar. Wow, that's a really hard word to say. He's familiar with the organization. His time here, I think, kind of has like mixed reviews with fans. Like, some people don't want him taking the ball out of Cade's hands. Other people remember towards the end he was kind of deferring to Cade. I think it's an option with Portland. They have like a lot of like weird, funky contracts, but they also have some young guys that I kind of like. But I don't know if Portland would do 7 and 14 for 5. I really don't.
I don't either. I think, like I said earlier, Memphis, Utah, Chicago, and OKC. Those are the teams to look at when you're trading 5.
For sure. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time because we've almost been on for 2 hours, but I do want to give you the floor again to plug your Twitter, plug Real BULLYBALL, and just to tell the people where they can find your content, where they can find articles that you write, all that good stuff.
Well, hopefully I can get through this without my dog losing his mind in the background. Again, I'm really sorry about that.
It's all good, man.
But he's really going crazy. You can find me on Twitter at Zariq Xavier, on Instagram at Zariq Xavier. My Instagram is mostly my photography. You can find me on Real BULLYBALL, which is our handle on every single social media platform. And we also have a website, bullyball.net, which is where you can find my articles and photos, because I have my own photo gallery as a section on the website. But we also will be moving our website from, as it currently is, to a Substack pretty soon, where we might have a little podcast of our own soon. So we'll see. We'll talk about that in the future. But we'll be growing a lot of the BULLYBALL brand. And, you can also find me at pretty much any Pistons Cruise event. I'm usually there taking pictures, writing, etc. And I appreciate you for having me on again. I'm very sorry about my dog deciding to lose his mind at this current moment. But I appreciate you, man.
It's all good. If you guys do want to follow Zara on Twitter, his Twitter link should be in the description below. If you want to check out Real BULLYBALL's Twitter and the website, it's also in the description below. I appreciate you coming on, man, making the time. I know it's like really busy season, especially with Piston stuff. I can't imagine how busy it's going to be next week with the draft and everything. But for all 958 of you guys in here right now, thank you guys for watching us for the last 2 hours. We'll see you guys next week. Peace.